welcome to another episode for Relate to You. We're very excited for yet another episode.
Yeah.
Because today we're going to be talking about books that have created us,
Yeah.
or that are, in a way building
Important
us
to
up,
us.
and they're important to us. Now, we're not including the Bible because last episode was all about reading the Bible and how important the Bible is to us. So we're just specifically talking about books that till this day maybe we go back to read them,
Yeah.
or that we learn a very good lesson from, or that we are reading currently and that they're making a huge impact in our lives. So
I would also like to give a disclaimer before we start. I am not a reader. So you will notice a difference in the different types of topics that Lula will search for. And you will also see a genre of what I am into. So we're appreciating all books and all readers.
Yes.
So if you are thinking, I don't read a lot, I'm your girl. So why don't you start us off? Because honestly, you can tell by our piles. And I should also mention, I've never been to Lula's room. Can we also take a moment to talk about that? I have never seen my best friend's room. How many years have we been friends?
We're going to go on 4, I think.
4 years. I've never seen her room. But I have seen many videos of what her room looks like. And I know that she has a very large bookshelf. So this isn't the half of it. But first and foremost, Lula, what got you into reading?
I think I remember vividly as I think 8-year-old, 8 to 9 years old. I found it in a sort of like an escape. I mean, again, I don't want to traumatize. Like, it's not about trauma.
No.
It was just kind of, I've always been a child that liked to be on her own.
Yeah.
So for me, it was always an escape. It was always like, oh, I much rather read, and so I think, and then I think, going off of last week's episode, the fact that my mom would read to us every night also made it exciting for me. So for me, reading was like, oh, okay, that you can find things in reading.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
What about you? Why don't you like reading?
I struggle with reading. I'm not a person that likes to sit still for a very long time. I don't enjoy it. And so it was very hard for me to read books that were more than stories, which you'll notice. I don't have them with me, but I have read them in grave detail. My favorite book series was the Lightning Thief series. And when I was in middle school, actually, prior to that, it was technically the series of unfortunate events. Again, I'm already revealing myself. But I didn't like to read. And obviously, they had these challenges where you had to read a certain amount of books by the end of the year. You had kids that were smart, that were reading the suggested list that they gave you. That was, for example, in every, growing up in high school and middle school, you've heard of The Catcher in the Rye. You've heard of The Grapes of Wrath. You've heard of Romeo and Juliet. You've heard of The Scarlet Letter. There's so many books that were just, you had to read. But I never wanted to follow those lists. I just wanted to get over my count, because the way that they would get you was if you reached a certain amount of words that you had read, you would get a Pizza Hut voucher. And so therefore you could go and get a free pizza. And so I always did it for the food. And so I chose books that were exciting to me, so that I could finish faster.
Right.
And so
good strategy.
It was a good strategy. So to this day, I have a hard time enjoying a book that doesn't really tell me a story. And so that's why I'm not a reader.
Right. You know what? Right now that you're saying that, I remember that when we came to the U.S. and I was in ESL class, we had to read English books, obviously, to learn English. And I hated every minute of it. I think that was the period in time where I hated reading. I really disliked reading. Well, first of all, I didn't really want it to learn English.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so for me, it was sort of like me protesting. But then, oh, you're reading like second grade, first grade level books because you're trying to learn the language.
Right.
So it was boring. It was boring. I mean, literally, I was reading Dr. Seuss, and it was just like, really? And I mean, well, obviously, I would do it because I had to learn English, but it was just kind of tiring. And then in the end, it was horrible because you know, we'll be in recess, and I'll be reading my Dr. Seuss book with just rhymes, and you know, people will be looking at me like, ESL student, you know, and I'm like, yeah, and so that was a period of time where I just didn't like books.
Maybe that's why you find Dr. Seuss creepy.
Maybe, nah, I've always found it creepy.
In
general, yeah, things like that creep me out a lot.
Well, to get us started, Lula, why don't you tell us like, obviously you chose these books for a certain reason.
Right.
But out of all of these, which one has had the most impact in your life?
I would say there are three. I would say...
And we are going to go into detail about these books.
I would say these three. This one, it's called The Art of Love.
Notice how it has no cover or
it
back.
has no cover or a back. It's The Art of Loving, I'm sorry, from Erich Fromm. And I just really, really enjoy it. You can see that I have notes on it and everything. And yes, it doesn't have front and back because it's been through a lot. It's been through a lot, and but I really, really love it. I think everyone should read it. It teaches us about maturity, self-awareness, courage, understanding others, love, which is what, you know. And I think what I like about it is that it teaches you that just like any art, love is an art, and it takes practice, and it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes, you know, it takes work.
Right.
And I think in a world where we use love, the word love, for I love that juice, I love that shirt, I love those shoes, it's a very new notion. You know, it's a very like, I've never thought of it. So I think everyone should read it because I do think that we're watering down the word love. Yeah.
That's good.
So this is one. And then this is another one. I've never found it in English.
She made me read this book.
I made her read this book, and I don't know if you hated it.
No, I didn't.
Okay. It's El Caballero de la Armadura Oxidada.
Translate that.
The knight in the oxidized armor. Rust. There you go. That's a better word. I mean, I do think oxidized exists, but anyway. And so I like this one because it's a sort of like a self-help book.
Yeah.
But it's a story. It's a story. It's not like, well, you know, I feel like a lot of self-help books now, they give you a list of things to do and, you know, wake up and do this and, you know, manifest and, you know, decreta, whatever.
Right.
But this book, I like it because it's a story. And without them putting it on your face, they're telling you, I've been through that. I've had that. And so it's pretty much about this guy, how he's lived in this armor for so many years. He doesn't know who he is.
Yeah.
He doesn't even know why he never took it off. He doesn't even know why he even put it on the first place. And so it talks about how we make up these things about ourselves in order to not be hurt, in order to feel a certain way, to be seen a certain way. And so I think it taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about like my own it's sort of it's also fantasy, so it talks a lot about castles and dragons. So it taught me a lot about my own castles and my own dragons. So I really like this one. And in fact, I like this so much that there's a second one, which is for marriages.
Oh, really?
And I read it, yeah. And so you should read it too.
Read it.
And
it's a really good book.
And so this one is just about the knight, but then what he finds out is that, okay, good, I've changed and I've done all this good stuff and good positive change in my life. But what do I, because he was married. He's married at the beginning of the book. So what do I do with my marriage now? I've it's a broken marriage because I've taken it to that point. How do I fix it? And so the second book is about marriage, and I think it's a very, very good book.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and the third one, it's well, this one is two in one, but I didn't know when I bought it. I don't know why I didn't see that it was two in one. So I started reading it thinking it was one book, and I noticed that it wasn't. So now I just read it like it's one book, but it really is two books. It's Animal Farm in 1984 by George Orwell. And yeah, and I really enjoy both stories because both stories talk about the government. And Animal Farm, I love it because it's just a phenomenal and a very witty and smart way of portraying people in politics.
I've only seen the movie, the cartoon one.
And I think it gives us a great example of, you know, especially nowadays. I think people should read these two books nowadays because it gives you a sense of, society has arrived to that point. And you know how we have these people that are saying we need to overthrow the government and replace it with something better, replace it. And that's the whole premise of Animal Farm.
Right.
These animals wanted to overthrow the government that was in place, but what it does is that just makes another government, now probably far worse than the first one, to have more power. And what people don't realize is that when you have one power overthrowing another power, someone's bound to be ruling. Someone's bound to always be at the top of the chain, and so those people are the ones that have the power. Not everyone, not everyone. So
That's what's made you kind of like a conspiracy theorist.
Yes. So Animal Farm, and then I mean, who hasn't heard about 1984? Maybe not a lot of people have read it, but I'm pretty sure a lot of
I've never read it, but I've heard it.
A lot of us have. I mean, there's a famous line of, we're all equal, but there are people that are more equal, something like that. And so for 1984, I think I like the fact that it's. I think now more than ever we can see the similarities. They're living in a utopian world or a dystopian world. No estoy muy segura. Of the government is in control of everything. They watch your every step. They rewrite stories or history rather. They rewrite history. They make their own propaganda. It's a very, very good book about how the government can truly make you to think and believe whatever they want, because they have that much control that you have allowed for them to have it.
Right.
And so
which I feel like ties into another book that I noticed, and the only reason why I recognize it, Brave New World, is because my sister, she read that book, and yes. I remember it was very similar in that mindset of like the government and yes. controlling us, and we're losing ourselves.
What I like about George Orwell, because they're pretty much the same theme. It's the same thing. It's about the government having that much control. But Brave New World, it takes it in a different direction. Brave New World, it takes it in like they really emphasize. I think if anything, Brave New World, it's a bit more it's darker. Oh. Because it gives it a spin on birth.
Oh.
And it gives it sort of like, for example, for here in George Orwell, it was almost like it's best if we don't have a family, if there's not if there isn't a unit of a family. And for them, it's kind of like the same thing, but for them it's like, but we still need to have children be born. Mm-hmm. So the government controls those children, and that is how they have control over. So the way they took it is like, no, children is better, that way no one gets attacked, blah blah blah. For them it was like, no, we need to have the children because they're going to be the future. We just need to control them. We just need to manipulate them. We need to let them know. And so it plays a lot with sexuality in children, and I think that's why it's a bit like it's hard to read at times, because it's like, they have I think dark themes, only because you're talking about the sexuality of children. I think. But it definitely still a good read. So, yeah. I
I
wish
think for
I was.
me, it's funny because like obviously like I've always admired Lula's thirst for knowledge and thirst for education. Um, she learns for fun, and one of her favorite like subscriptions is like National Geographic, or she enjoys, like she would tell me how she would just like, I learned about this, or there was a period where I wanted to learn about astrophysicism and stuff like that. And so I I admire people who are like that. And even though my best friend is like this, and I would even say my husband is like this, he loves reading and he loves learning. I don't have the same like thirst. Hopefully someday. But for me, books are more of an escape and more of a way for me to dream and a way for me to fantasize. So I have these, but there are other books that I don't have with me, that I have a feeling I have them downstairs, but I'm not sure. So Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility are two books that I've read that are from Jane Austen, which I feel like in some ways, in the way that it has made me who I am, is more of it's like my interests. I liked that period. I liked the period of gentlemen and young ladies. I liked that romance. I liked that you want to marry for love, but you're poor, so you might marry for convenience era.
But then somehow you find the rich guy.
Right. I loved the language. I love how the way that they spoke. It's funny because my sister always says this. She's like, "You're only cool because I made you cool," which is true. A lot of what I like and what I enjoy has a lot to do with the fact that, like, these are hand-me-downs from my sister. These are her books. And what she was into, I wanted to be into. Because my sister is a reader. She was a reader. And so whenever she would, stop reading something, as a matter of fact, I think I have it. My sister has a stamp in a lot of her books that say Anna. And so it took a lot of like begging for me, like, you don't even read these books anymore. I want them. But my love for Jane Austen and my love for that era has to do with Annie. And so part of it, I associate that as my sisterhood bond with her.
Oh, that's nice.
And I associate in the way that it has affected my personality is my femininity. In terms of that era, in terms of that style of book and that style of reading, I feel like I am the way that I am because of that,
now that you mentioned, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I feel like that happened to me too with Selene, my older sister. She, out of all my sisters, I think she was the one that read the most. And she had, tenía Homero, Romeo y Julieta, La Odisea, I mean, the Odyssey, Homer. Entonces I feel because I wanted to sort of emulate her, I ended up taking up reading. Now that you're bringing me back memories.
That where you yeah. And so I think that for me, those first books, the way that they impacted my life was I'm going to be cautious with my words because it can eat them up later. It helped me in finding a sense of security in my femininity and in a sense of feeling secure and wanting to be not a damsel in distress, but in a way it defined gender roles for me. So it defined to me what a lady looked like, which was she was feminine, she was demure, she was beautiful, she was gentle, but then she also had a spark of her, but she knew who she was and what she was supposed to do, but then he was strong and courageous and gentlemanlike. And so God. I think that's why I have a lot of like, no, I know I can do it, but let him do it. Or the pursuit of having someone chase after me. I think that's why even in my own love story with Joel, there's a lot of that. And so...
Oh my God, should I read him? Jesus.
So I think those two books, I'll never forget. They're in one of my English papers in middle school. There is a portion in the book, and I feel like I can quote more of the movie, but the story goes about how this young woman, she is part of the lower class, and this rich man, he moves into their countryside, and he has a friend, Mr. Darcy, who we all want to find a Mr. Darcy in our lives. I've found my Mr. Darcy, and he's very proud, and he's rich, and he looks at people that are beneath him, and tú no eres para nadie. And Elizabeth, she is, yes, she's feminine, and yes, she is, all of these great things, but she's also like, I'm not going to let you make me feel like I'm less than just because I don't have money. And so the whole story is about Pride and Prejudice, and how he's proud because he's rich, but then he's also prejudiced with her, as far as like, tú eres así, but then she also gives it back. Anyways, el caso es que I like their love story. I like how they, fall in love. But there's a portion where he asks her to marry him, and she refuses him. And she says, it was your selfish disdain and your feelings for others that could not have tempted me to have accepted you. I wrote that in my essay. I wrote, I think I wrote it this way. I wrote, the character was a really bad one because her selfish disdain and her inconsideration for the feelings of others, which is a quote, was what made her bad. So the beginning of what made the character bad and is what made her bad was me. The internal part of the wording of selfish disdain and inconsideration of other people's feelings was Jane Austen. And so I'm like, what the heck was I thinking? And even I wish I had it, teacher circled it. And when it's a time where it's like, okay, this kind of sounds like you, but this doesn't really sound like you. She circled that, and she's like, I like your word choice, but I don't understand why you placed it there, So I want to say that, that's a first, staple. But the one book, again, it's romance, The Princess, Lori Wick. To this day, I want Luna to read it, but I also don't want her to ruin it for me. So sometimes I'm like, don't read it. Joel, as a matter of fact, read it. He, two things was he did. He didn't read, but he watched Pride and Prejudice when we were friends, when we were not even dating, because he wanted to be like, I know this is one of your favorite movies. Aww. And so I want to understand you. And he sat through the 4-hour version of Pride and Prejudice, and he read this book, which is my favorite book.
Oh, it's not that long. I could read it
at all. The Princess is a Christian romance story. One of my favorite and only favorite authors is called Lori Wick.
So that one is.
This is also okay. From Lori Wick. If you go to my bookshelf, 90% of my books are from Lori Wick. And the story is about this man who, he's a prince, and he has lost his wife. And in order for him to secure his kingdom, he has to marry. And in order for him to marry, he has to meet someone, but he doesn't want to do that. And so it's Christian, it's fantasy. And so his parents are very much like, well, like, you got to get married. What do you want to do? We don't want to pressure you. And he's like, I'll let you guys choose someone for me, and I will follow with whatever you guys will go. Because I know that you guys love me, and I know that our faith is what matters the most. And I know that you will make an objective decision of who you choose for me. And so they go out and they search, and they end up finding the main character, Shelby, and they fall in love with her. They're like, she's so graceful, she's so beautiful, she's so feminine. There's a lot of these similar things. And so they say, okay, we found someone. And he's like, okay, like, ask her, don't try to scare her, but if she's willing, then okay. They tell her, and of course, the way the story goes, she eventually accepts, and they get married. But even though they're married, she's like, I know that this is a Christian marriage, and so how can I, like I know I'm in a loveless marriage. I know that he's still pining and mourning his wife, how can I be of service to him, you know? And so she has a resolve of like, my purpose in this life is to be queen and to do what I can to, you know, help those around me and meet my needs. And if my marriage is just kind of like an establishment or for show, the Lord knows that for duty and country, I'm doing my job. But the story is so beautiful because anything, which this one is very similar, anything that involves two people that did not set up to fall in love and end up falling in love, that is what, you know, makes me like, and it's so funny because this story is so like their romance and everything. Like, I wish it was a movie. And there are so many things about it that in their way that they care for each other is beautiful. But what I like most about this author is that she does talk about God. She puts scripture in her story because the characters talk about God. Oh. I've been praying for you, and have you considered
I know right now I opened it and it was like, would you pray for my father? I was like, oh.
Yeah. And so, but it's so seamless. It's not like, you know, you're reading scripture. It's a story, but the characters are talking about God, and the characters
that'd be interesting. I would like to read it.
So I think that, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily impacted my life. Maybe that it's changed me. But I think what I aspire to have is, because I know these are fictional characters and they're not perfect, but in the books they seem perfect. The way that they have a maturity in their relationship with God, I think Lori Wick does a great job of representing that. For example, in this book that I'm currently reading right now at work, she, to make long story short, has a very hard life. And at some point, she's talking to the pastor's wife and she's telling her, how do you get through it? What gets you through, you know, what you're going through? And she said, you know, I was reading the story of the woman with the oil, the miracle of the oil. And the prophet tells her to bring all of these jars so that they could fill it with oil. And notice how she doesn't have an expectation as to how much God is going to provide for her. But it's the prophet that tells her, gather as many jars as you can. And so she's telling, you know, the pastor's wife in the book, she's like, I realize that a lot of the times when it comes to my relationship with God, I feel like God is only going to give me a migaja, kind of his blessing. I never expect more from God. I never expect that God is going to provide and do something for me greater than what he should. And in the story, it shows how big God is. So when I am reminded of how big God is, it should bring me comfort to know that regardless of what's going on in my life, if my God is that big, then he's going to see me through it.
Right.
So I'm reading a romance, but I'm being reminded within my own life of like, how big do you see your God? You know, so I'm going to throw it back because I actually have one book that's actually helped my life. But so far, I would say that up until this point, the majority of the books that I read are more for fun, are more for escape, and are more for me to find a romance.
No, but I think that's, guys, don't get me wrong. I'm up for romance. I mean, okay, huge disclaimer. I read the whole Twilight saga, and I'm not ashamed of it. I don't even want to call it a guilty pleasure. I've read them and I've reread them. You know, I mean, recently salió la de Midnight Sun, which is Edward's POV.
Oh.
I read that too. And that came out, 2 years ago? And I read it 2 years ago. You know, so I'm a sucker for those stories too. It's just yes, I tend to gravitate towards books that I can implement in a way. Yeah. But I love me a storyline that they, especially if they hated each other at the beginning. Woo! And then somehow they start falling in love, and then at the end they really cannot live without each other. Oh yeah, I really enjoy those stories. I really like that. You know, actually, right now I know we were saying about books, but the way you were talking about those books, it reminded me of these movies. They're Hallmark, I think. They're Christian. Sale.
Oh, you're thinking of Love Comes Softly.
Love Comes Softly.
Those are
Que son like 5 movies, 4
yes,
movies.
Yes.
And I remember watching them like when I was super young with my brother-in-law and my sister, and they were very, very nice.
The first one is the best one.
Yes, of course.
After
of course,
that,
siempre, siempre.
it's good, but it's the first one.
Pero es the first one, siempre. Siempre va a ser la first one. Pero, so I really like that. But my question for you is, what? Because I do think that they. Okay, did you ever, since you were saying, oh, they gave me an idea of what a woman or a feminine woman should behave? Did you ever like behave in a way that
100%.
that you were like
That I was mimicking a character?
Yeah.
100%. In this book, Shelby, she's very easily embarrassed in a way.
Mm-hmm.
She's very shy at times, and whenever the Prince Nikolai does something or tells her something, she blushes, and he finds that super attractive, that he made her blush, or that he made her, want to turn her face in this certain way. And so I think that I adopted ways to be coy, and I wanted to find a way to bring that out from the person that liked me, or that he could make me feel like, oh, I made you feel that way. And so, yes, I think that in some ways I did mirror that, because it's like, ¿quién va a saber? Okay, maybe I'm trying to imitate, Bella, we all know the story, but it's like, who's going to know Shelby Parker? Nobody's read the story, and so, yes, there were certain things that I liked. But I think more than anything, which recently I feel like I've been doing, more than anything that I mirrored, was I tried to mirror the way that they had a relationship with God. So instead, like they mention it so much, like, oh, I knew better than to ask because it was none of my business, or I knew better than to press her because I know I needed to bring this to God in prayer. Those are things that sometimes I'm like, man, I'm so quick to, ¿y qué pasó? And dime, and I feel like this week at least, I don't know if you've noticed.
I have.
I have,
because I haven't have a window to say something.
I've tried to be more prayerful for you, rather than being more like, ¿y qué pasó? And what happened? Because in the book, they are like, you're supposed to leave it to God. You're not the one that's supposed to figure out how this works out.
Right.
It's on him. And so I think it's that I try to mirror more than anything when I'm reading them. What is your next book?
Well, this one I recently read it. Right, okay.
I'm going to make fun of you right away when I saw the title.
Okay, hold on. My mom bought it for me when I was 14.
Oh, young.
Oh, my mom has always been on me to read books. I kid you, my mom used to go to the Santa Barbara, and I think I mentioned this on another podcast. My mom used to go to the Santa Barbara swap meet, and she would buy books by the dozen. And she would, cada 15 días, Lula, mira lo que te traje. Mira and she'd be so excited. I'd be like, thank you, Mom. And I'd be looking at them like, why do I need this? And a lot of them were self-help books.
Did you grow up? I don't know if that's something that you understand, but have you ever heard of Chicken Soup?
No.
The Chicken Soup books?
No.
Maybe that's just my time. There were similarly to self-help books, but my sister and my mom had a tendency of buying those books a lot, and it was like the Chicken Soup of romance, or it was like the Chicken Soup of the growing teen, or something. Like, it was just, yeah.
Oh, wow. There is something similar, pero in Mexico, and I brought a book of those.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, I read it when I was 14 to please my mom. Didn't understand a single thing. It was just kind of like just the words. Just, I was like, oh, well, I understood some like overall theme, but I never really paid much attention. So recently, my mom has been on me, Lula, because of your job, you need to become better with people. Lula, yes, God is working with you, but you also need to help him. Like, you also need to do your part, you need to become better. So she's like, read it. I started reading it, and I found out that it has a lot of good things. I found out that it has a lot of good things. Yes, it's very hard to implement a lot of the things that it talks about, but it is a very good book. So it's called How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Is this how you got me?
Yes. Uh, um, I think what I liked about it, and see, I have read it. But I think what I liked about it is that it's not so much just words and words and words and words like I felt it was when I was 14. It's a lot of stories about this people, business people really, that said, well, you know what works for me to influence people and gain a friend was this.
Ooh, so it's not like a story or a self-help. It's
No. It's just, I mean,
collections.
it's sort of like at the beginning of each chapter they give you the theme of that chapter, and then the narrator or the writer goes through like people that went up to him to showed him examples of that theme.
It kind of reminds me of the 48 Laws of Power. Like,
Yeah,
it's different things that worked for different people
Exactly.
to do this.
To obtain that, yeah. So it's a very good book. I recommend you read it. I'm pretty, maybe even Joel has read it or has
Honestly, I have a feeling he has read something similar. If
something
not this one.
similar and everything. What I like about that one is that it's people in business. It's not just like people in business saying this is what worked for me in order to not just influence someone but gain their trust, gain them as a friend. So it's a very, very good book. Again, very hard to implement everything. I don't think I'm there yet. It's one of those things where you need to reread it and, sort of. What I do think has happened is that when I have found myself thinking, how should I resolve this situation? And then obviously I take it to God and everything. And then I'll think, well, how did it say it in the book that it could be solved? And then I'll reread it and just that part, and then and then funny enough, a lot of what it says, it goes with the Bible talks about.
It's funny that you said that because I feel like you do this well. It says, instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. That's a lot more profitable and intriguing than criticism, and it breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. To know all is to forgive all. As Dr. Johnson said, God himself, sir, does not propose to judge man until the end of his days. Why should you and I?
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, you do this. I feel like you not to put your dirty laundry out there, but we had a conversation once where, I feel like you were having a moment where you were doubting yourself. And Lula pretty much was saying, like, I don't know if I'm a good friend. I don't know if I really, do what I need to do in friendships. And I was like, bro, like, a lot of the times your simple listening and your simple understanding is exactly what someone needs. And I feel like you do that. I think you try to understand people as much as you can.
I try. I do. I've been trying to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Because you don't like to be misunderstood, so why will you?
Why would I misunderstand someone? So it's a very good book. I owe it to my mom. I owe it to my mom. My 14-year-old self could never, but hey, catch me a couple years later, understanding it better. So that's one, and then the other one is La Fuerza de Schecid. This is a romance book.
Oh,
yeah, it's a romance book, a Christian romance book. But not only that. Okay, here's why I said I am a sucker for these things, because it's not just a Christian romance book.
She highlights.
It's a poetic Christian romance book. This guy is in love with Schecid, which is not her real name. So pretty much it's a coming of age book.
Oh, okay.
They're teenagers. He falls in love with this girl. He makes out a version of who she is in his head, in his mind. So he falls in love with that image, and he calls her Schecid. So he has an idea of like, we're falling in love. We I'm living for this woman. And so he gives beautiful poetry, not his own. The poetry is from other poets. But what I like about it is that it's a romance, but it's of a broken hearted. It ends with a broken heart.
Yeah.
Because he realizes, she's not who I thought she was. I made her in my mind. I made her up in my mind. And I mean, I don't want to, so, but the whole time he's so close with his parents that are Christian that he shares that, and his parents keep telling him, take it to God, pray about it. And no, look, like, and they're trying to let him see her for who she is. And he's like, no, and he recites this poetry, and what I like about it too is that because of her, he finds it in him that he's good at stuff, that he's good at being brave, that he's good, that he not good at being brave, that he's brave, that he can have strength, and that is why it's called la Fuerza de Checid, because even though he made her up in his head,
Right.
but that version that he made up, it's what allowed him to discover that he's brave, that he's capable of feeling love for someone else, feeling empathy for people. I think he even gets closer with people in his family. So it's a very good book. This Carlos Cuauhtemoc Sanchez is Christian, or used to be. I don't know. And he wrote a lot of books geared towards Christian kids, and I liked about it because it was for teenagers. Oh. So there's like 10 books of him, and I've read like 8 of them.
Oh, okay.
And but my favorite is always this one, because I think I just love the fact that he's so like unafraid to show her how how much he likes her. But at the end, te das cuenta that the whole time she was just like, no, thank you. No? She was just kind enough to him, and kind enough for him to see, yeah, she's good, she's kind. But he soon realizes that she's not who he thought she was. But I really like it because la poesía is just amazing. I write poetry myself, so this is very inspiring. And this is one of my favorite poems. Lo voy a leer, a ver, así bien rápido. As you can tell, I even used it for my flowers. So it says, quiero ser en tu vida algo más que un instante, algo más que una sombra y algo más que un afán. Quiero ser en ti misma una huella imborrable y un recuerdo constante y una sola verdad. Palpitar en tus rezos con temor de abandono, ser en todo y por todo complemento de ti. Una sed infinita de caricias y besos, pero una costumbre de estar cerca de mí. Y bueno, it goes on and on and on.
Very romantic.
Very romantic. So I really enjoy this one. I do go back and read it whenever I'm feeling blue. Whenever I feel like
you want to feel romantic.
Yes, Jesus. I want to feel romantic in a safe way. So that's
that is a really good balance. Like let's see what we have here. So we have, how to win friends and influence people. You have Lula's thirst for being able to know how to be around other people and how to, handle them. Clearly she has the art of loving, so she wants to be a person that can express love the right way. You got a little bit of her conspiracy with Brave New World and George Orwell. These, I wouldn't know necessarily how to categorize them, El Caballero de la Armadura Oxidada, aside from trying to understand your life and finding a way to find the purpose in what you've experienced, maybe. Obviously, I haven't read this one, pero there. And then this one is the romantic and
yeah,
for sure.
The romantic.
Sure. That is a really good balance.
I hope so.
My only book that I could say that has impacted me, aside from the stories and all of that, is called Sacred Marriage. I read this right before I got married. I don't have it with me, but The Love Languages, I would say, is probably another book that has probably impacted me. Joel and I read Sacred Marriage, Love Languages, Loveology, and there was one more book.
I heard that one's good. Loveology?
It's good. It's good. And then we read something along the lines of courting before dating or something like that. So we read a lot of books prior to getting married. And this one it summarizes very well. It says, "What if God designed marriage to make us more holy rather than to make us happy?" I think this book has impacted my life so much because, as you can see, you have fantasy and you have reality. You have the fantasy of a romance that is, perfect and whimsical and exciting and dreaming. And then you have the reality of what marriage really is, which marriage isn't like that, and I don't want to say that in a morbid way of, don't dream of marriage being exciting or anything like that. Not at all. Just today, before you got here, Joel and I were dancing in our kitchen. So that there are romantic moments in marriage, of course there are. But I think that especially for someone like me, that had an expectation for how marriage was going to look like in rose-colored glasses with some playlist in the background. I think that this book brought me down in a sense to realize this thing that you and your husband are in now is not just for your pleasure, is not just for you two to be happy, and how else could we make each other feel good or excited or in love. It's actually a way to grow as Christians. And so, especially now that I've been married for 3 years, I can honestly attest marriage is sacrificial. And you do not always love your partner as selflessly and as blindly as you may see in books and movies at times. And I think that this book, it takes different stories of ways that marriage is sacrificial. He one of the things that kind of stuck out to me was in a moment where his wife had just had a baby, and she's breastfeeding. She's breastfeeding her baby, but she also has a toddler who's crying and wants her attention, doesn't want daddy's attention, wants mommy's attention. She's exhausted after labor. And he's seeing how, he's explaining how his wife was a literal, representation of sacrifice. Her entire mind, body, and soul is being used for others in this situation, to feed her child, to comfort the other one that's sick, while putting away her own needs of comfort and whatever, and recovery. And so he uses that as an example of, like, that's how marriage is. If you think that loving your partner is going to come easy to you all the time, you're wrong. You're setting yourself up for failure. Marriage is difficult because you two are imperfect. And what the problem is when it comes to marriage is that we never see ourselves for what we really are. We always see ourselves as the main character, as she can do no wrong and the world happens to me. But it's you happening to the world as well, and to others. And so when I read the book, I remember that after I felt a little bit down and I felt a little bit negative, and I almost had this like, well, yeah, but it's
marriage is different.
It's not going to be like different for me, It's going to be, still, we're going to make it what it is, And I have heard that advice where people's like, if you want a romantic marriage, or if you want a marriage to look a certain way, you have to make it what it is, right? And I agree with that. But more than anything, what I can take from this is that it taught Joel and I a lesson to look forward to in marriage, that sometimes forgiving is hard, sometimes loving is hard, sometimes service is hard. They talk a lot about service and how we think, oh yeah, of course I'm going to wake up every morning and make my husband breakfast and lunch and dinner, and it's going to be exactly what I want to do every day. And it's like, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. And so again, I think the reason why this book made a huge impact in my life is because I see relationships now as sacrificial. Every relationship that I have is going to cost something from me, whether it's my time, whether it's my heart, whether it's my being on my knees on prayer, it's going to take something out of me. But that's not a bad thing. Sacrifice is not a bad thing. And being happy shouldn't be your utmost
priority
goal.
Yeah.
And again, because it's a Christian book, it brings it back to what really matters, which is find a way to look at your marriage as a ministry. Every time that you push through, you know, like you withhold something and you choose to forgive and you choose not to condemn, it's a ministry. Every time you choose to be an example to your husband or to your wife, in an effort to express to them the love of Christ, it's a ministry. Every time that you are selfless and you put your needs to the side and you choose to serve, that is the way that Jesus chose to serve the world and serve us. And so there's just so many layers to the book, but I think it's the one thing that balances me out, so that I'm not on one extreme, but at the same time, neither on just the extreme of there's no love, there's no romance. It's a balance. It's a balance.
I think that's a good a good midpoint, reality is reality, we can't change that. But I agree with you. I do think también you make of any friendship, any relationship really, what you want it, you make of it what you want it, what you want it to be. It's with our friendship, I don't think we would have been friends and this very good friends had we not worked at it.
Right.
And so I think lo mismo con marriage, lo mismo con tus hijos también. The relationship you have with them is what the work you put in. And so I think that's a great book. I might read it.
We might switch.
Well, guys, we hoped that we gave you, if not these books, maybe at least the inspiration to start taking up reading.
There's always Audible.
Yes.
If you don't want to read, you can always listen.
Just listen and call it reading. But definitely, I think what we were trying to aim with this episode was to make people aware that we need to read. We need to, get those mind
juices,
working, and it's just good to read overall, I think. Be it for fun, be it for interest of like, knowledge
growth,
or whatever, growth. Be it even something as simple as I think, maybe I'm wrong, but subtitles on TV shows are a good read as well. So do that. Anyway, we just wanted to inspire people to read from people that like to read and that doesn't really. So there you go. All right, guys. So give us suggestions as well. Maybe write it in the comment section what your favorite books are. Maybe I'm always looking for Christian writers. Maybe something, like that. So please, okay. Thank you, guys. See you next time. Bye.